Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I called to order this meeting of the Board of Directors, a regular meeting of the FORA Reuse Authority. It's Friday, April 12, 2013. We've got the call to order. We'll be going to closed session soon. In closed session, we'll have a counsel with our legal counsel, existing litigation, Government Code 54956.9 Alpha, 4 cases. Keep Forwarded Wild versus Forwarded Reuse Authority, cases number M114961, M16438, M119217, and the City of Marina versus Forwarded Reuse Authority, case number M118566. We will also have a conference with our legal counsel, anticipated litigation, Government Code 54956.9 Bravo, 2 cases, plus a Public Employee Appointment Authority Council, Government Code 54957. Before we go into closed session, does any member of the public wish to address the board with regard to any of these cases we'll be speaking about in closed session? Seeing none, we are now adjourning from open session. We'll reconvene in closed session right next door. Thank you very much. We'll be back as soon as we possibly can. Ladies and gentlemen, we're reconvening in open session. We'll start the session off with roll call, please.
City of Carmel by the Sea, Mayor Burnett.
Here.
City of Delray Oaks, Mayor Edelin.
Here.
City of Marina, First Vice Chair, Mayor Pro Tem O'Connell.
Here.
Councilmember Morton. Here. City of Monterey, Councilmember Selfridge.
Here.
Monterey County, Supervisor Potter. Supervisor Salinas. Supervisor Parker. City of Pacific Grove, Mayor Camp. Here. City of Salinas, Mayor Gunter.
Here.
City of Sand City, Mayor Pendergrass.
Here.
City of Seaside, Councilmember Edwards.
Here.
Councilmember Alexander.
Here.
20th Congressional District, Sonia Arndt. 17th State Senate District, Nicole Charles. 29th State Assembly District, Erica Parker. University of California, Bruce Margon. California State University, Andre Lewis. Monterey Peninsula College, Walter Tribley. Monterey Peninsula Unified School District, Marilyn Shepard. Monterey Salinas Transit, Mike Gallat. Transportation Agency of Monterey County, Debbie Hale. United States Army, Pamela Von Ness. Port Ord BRAC Office, Bill Collins. Marina Coast Water District, Director Moore. Chair Edelin, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. I would ask our authority counsel, Mr. John Giffen, if he would report out from closed session, please.
Yes. In closed session, the board heard from and considered the report of counsel, took direction, but no reportable action was taken pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.
Okay. Thank you very much. I now ask Councilman Alvin Edwards if he would please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Alvin. Okay, next we have acknowledgments, announcements, and correspondence. I've got a couple of announcements myself. We have revised board agendas and several additional materials have been placed on each board member place and on the table in the corridor. Additionally, the base reuse plan reassessment binders that were requested by the board in March have been placed at each board member's seat. At present, the binders contain the base reuse plan reassessment and copies of the Category 1 draft figures. Materials will be added to the binders and the post-reassessment process continues. Several public copies of the binders are available for inspection in the FORA office but may not be removed from the office. We need to maintain, they're very expensive. We have to keep the numbers down. A last announcement from me. An initiative has been filed to amend the base reuse plan to designate certain parcels designated for development as open space. FORA staff is exploring the possibility of contracting with Monterey County to handle FORA's responsibility under the initiative. Michael.
Yes, Chair Edelin, I also want to make an announcement about our May 2nd and 3rd Fort Ord Prevailing Wage Training Conference. Over the course of the last year, we've received something akin to 30 different inquiries about the process used for determining prevailing wage, what projects are eligible, how does the provisions of our Chapter 3 and other provisions of the base reuse plan apply to prevailing wage and policy, how does the FORA policy overlap with the requirements at California State University, Monterey Bay, University of California, Monterey Peninsula College, the City of Seaside, and others who've all adopted their own provisions for prevailing wage, along with the fact that we have some projects that from time to time are under Davis-Bacon provisions because they are federal contract and construction requirements. And so we, in response to all of those requests and at the behest of those who want to make sure it's clear for as many as it possibly can be, we're co-hosting with others a prevailing wage conference focused primarily on what it takes to do prevailing wage at the former Fort Ord, but also to understand the application of prevailing wage and how it is applied generally in the state of California. So wanted to make sure to remind everyone about that. You all are receiving or will receive invitations for the conference, and this is for everyone from policymakers to those that are at the staff level who have to be responsible for the reporting and the requirements. So Chair Edelin, I just wanted to report on the prevailing wage conference.
Thank you very much. We're trying to move this meeting along as quick as we possibly can, these 4.5-hour meetings, as much as we like to be together here on Fridays. We're trying to move it very quickly. We're not supposed to start official business till 4:15. The way we've actually put the wording in the agenda packet thus far, we've got about 3 minutes before we can actually start official business. Mr. Bill Nye came up to me ahead of time. Would like to make a public comment. The public comment period will be at the end of this, so we can get the official business done. But since we're killing 3 minutes right now, and we've got the 3 minutes, Mr. Nye, if you'd like to address the board, you may. We can kill two birds with one stone, and we appreciate hearing your comments.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, thank you very much for giving me this time. I live in the Big Sur Plan area. My father first came to Fort Ord in 1941, and I was born here in 1947. There is currently an effort afoot with a petition drive to restrict all future development on Fort Ord property. And this is what it will effectively do is, although they claim to not be opposed to the cemetery, it will effectively disallow access to that property, which essentially puts the cemetery to rest. It will never happen if that goes forward. It also will disallow construction of a veterans healthcare facility that is in great need here. Currently, we have many veterans who have to travel all the way to Palo Alto for their healthcare needs. To allow the construction of this facility would allow these individuals access on a more local level. I would like to think that those who are putting this petition forward will reconsider the way that they have written it and allow access to the cemetery property and also allow construction of that healthcare facility here at Fort Ord. With that, I thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment, sir. Okay, by my watch, we've got about 4:15 right now. We can start official business. First item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Any member of the board wish to pull any items for questions or discussion? Any member of the public wish to pull any items for questions or discussion? Okay, back to the board. Michael, do you have a comment?
Yes, I just wanted to note for the members of the board that you do have a copy of the full legislative tract before you, and the legislative committee will be taking up other letters like the ones you've seen before you, who've either been requested by Senator Monning or Assemblymember Stone or others for FORA support in certain state legislation. I just want to draw your attention to those specific items.
Thank you. Okay, I'd entertain a motion at this time.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the consent agenda by Mayor Pro Tem Frank O'Connell, and the second is from Supervisor Potter. All in favor? Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Thank you very much. And we also thank Assemblymember Stone and Senator Monning for their support of this action. It goes a long way. We really do appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, next we have old business. First item, FORA pollution, legal liability insurance presentation and report. Michael?
Yes, Chair Edelin and members of the FORA board, many of you were not on the FORA board in 2004 when we negotiated an environmental liability insurance policy. The 2000 agreement between the Army and the Fort Ord Reuse Authority provided that we would eventually wind up with thousands of acres of land. The Fort Ord Reuse Authority and the jurisdictions would all have certain liability associated with receiving former military property for many of the obvious reasons. Today, we are joined by Barry Steinberg, who is FORA counsel with respect to these kinds of matters and other environmental issues. And he's going to present the Fort Ord Reuse Authority Board with a status update on the work that we are doing with the PLL insurance and how it overlaps with other policies. He will also talk about the impact of the 10-year policy that we purchased in 2004 that expires at the end of next year and how that affects the jurisdictions, because I know all of you who are particularly representative of land use jurisdictions will want to understand what that means to you.
Thank you, Michael. By my count, there are only two members of the board who were here when we did this once before. Supervisor Potter and Mayor Pendergrass are the only two, so for some of you it may be the first time that you've ever heard any of the details of the insurance policy. To be clear, there are two insurance policies involving Fort Ord right now. One, most of you are familiar with, it is the Environmental Services Cooperative Agreement policy that essentially covers us for cost overruns for cleaning up the Army's contamination. That is not the policy we're talking about. This is a policy that was negotiated back in 2003 timeframe when we did not know that we were going to be able to procure the Environmental Services Cooperative Agreement or the amount of money to clean it up. At that point in time, we were looking at being a landholder through a tenancy relationship for many years, not knowing when or if the Army would clean the property up. We bought the policy effective 31 December 2004. As Michael indicates, it expires 31 December 2014. It is a fairly complicated policy. It is also an extraordinarily large policy. It's a $100 million policy for which we paid approximately $6 million for premium, surplus lines tax, and broker fees. We have to date had absolutely no claims on that policy, and that's a significant factor if and when we go back to the market to buy another policy that would carry us for another 10 years. Next slide, please. Our coverage includes three basic types of exposure: cleanup costs, personal injury or property damage, and defense costs. And the coverage, it's an unusual policy because typically pollution legal liability policies exclude at military installations munitions and explosives of command, munitions and explosives of concern. The reason that the premium was as large as it was when we bought this policy was because we negotiated to obtain coverage for MEC, because we perceive then and still perceive that if there are risks out here, MEC is a very real one, and it is the one that, quite frankly, scares people, including your developers. But the policy also covers other pollution conditions. Next slide, please. It's a 10-year policy, $100 million, expiration date 31 December 2014. FORA is the named insured, but we provided coverage through additional named insured status for the local landowning jurisdictions and the developers. And what happened was the local landowning jurisdictions took slices of that $100 million, and then they in turn parceled out slices of their coverage to their developers. This was particularly important to the developers because the developers almost uniformly were going to the bank to borrow money for their development project. The insurance gave the bank, the lender, a pretty good feel that if there were an untoward event out on the property, it would not cause the developer to go belly up, and they would be able to weather the storm and complete their project. We anticipate that we would obtain the same type of coverages going forward, including that for the developers and the landowning jurisdictions. The amount of coverage, next slide please, the amount of coverage in all likelihood would be less. When we bought $100 million, quite frankly, we didn't know where we were going to be in 10 years, and we didn't know what all the risks were. We now have much better site characterization. We've engaged in very substantial remedial work out there as well as investigation. The unknowns in many cases have become knowns, and so we do not see the risk as great as it was then. And so we contemplate that we will not buy as much insurance, and we would hope that the insurance markets would not charge as much as they did last time for the risk, because the risk is substantially less than it was. To be clear, we can never say that the risk is zero, but we can say that the risk is remarkably reduced from the unknown conditions that we were facing 10 years ago when we negotiated the policy. We have, under the ESCA grant, approximately $950,000 that were allocated to buy pollution legal liability insurance to cover the ESCA project. When we went to the marketplace to buy that policy, probably 6 or 7 years ago, 6 years ago, what we found was that the cost was very high for relatively little coverage. So we went back to the Army and said, we don't think it's wise for us to spend the money at this point in time to buy a policy of questionable value for the cleanup pollution legal liability component, not the cleanup itself. And therefore, we'd like to hold on to that money, and at a later point in time, we'll go back to the markets and see what we can do. And in the meanwhile, we will put that money in a separate fund and use it in the event that we have a claim filed against FORA or any of its components. We have never had a claim. That money still sits there. What we contemplate is that that sum of approximately $950,000 would go toward the purchase of the next pollution legal liability policy. So that's contemplated at this point, but be aware that those funds are available. The problem that we would have is if we let the policy expire and we just don't replace it. There would be sitting on the $950,000 for as long as it would last. We would not have anything like $100 million worth of coverage or even $50 million, and we would be self-insured, which means that the landholding jurisdictions would have their general fund at risk should there be a claim filed against them as the properties transfer. We consider at this point in time that the likelihood of an event involving munitions and explosives of concern that would give rise to a claim is very low. We can't tell you it's zero. It's very low. But as you can imagine, although the risk is small, the consequences could be catastrophic. And so we still believe that we need a sizable policy. Next slide, please. The options, we can go naked, you're self-insured, your general fund is at risk. Use the remaining PLL ESCA funds to help purchase a new policy. We think we want a 10-year policy, and I'll explain why. FORA, as you know, will go away about 6 years or 7 years into that next policy. At that point in time, either because the real estate involved will have been transferred to the landholding jurisdictions, or through the state process of LAFCO, the risk and responsibility will be allocated to the landholding jurisdictions. They're going to want and need the coverage. This is basically a recommendation to you. We think that having continuity of coverage through that transition period is very important. Otherwise, each of the landholding jurisdictions are going to be back in the marketplace, shopping for their own policy. Each one of them will pay first dollar coverage, and first dollar insurance coverage is the most expensive coverage. FORA uses its leverage to pay first dollar coverage one time, and then how the fee, the cost of that policy is charged to the jurisdiction is blended so that none of you would pay the full first dollar coverage risk. It's a very cost-effective way to cover you, and it gets you through the transition period. In addition to that, we have always been concerned that if each of you were to buy your own policy at some point in the future, there are dividing lines between what belongs to what jurisdiction, and you will get cross-border issues. So one of you buys insurance from Company A, the other buys insurance from Company B. There's an event that takes place somewhere along the border event, and guess what the insurance companies are going to do? Each one of them is going to point to the other one and say, you're liable. One policy covering the entire property without regard to the borderline essentially takes care of the cross-border dispute issue and ensures that the funds will be there for coverage. In addition to that, as I said before, I think that we will probably go to market for reduced limits. We're not quite there yet, but that's where we're going. Bear with me 1 second. I believe that's it. What we contemplate doing, we've been working with the broker, Marsh, Kathy Geddes, who was with us when we bought the policy 10 years ago, 9.5 years ago. And Kathy continues to represent you. She and I work together. We've talked through this. Probably in about 5 or 6 months, we will come back to the board with what we consider to be the appropriate solicitation that will go to the various insurance carriers. We will want your approval to go to the marketplace for that, to solicit their input, and then we will have something to negotiate, figure out what we want to do, what the prices will be, how the slices to the jurisdiction and the developers will be allocated, and we'll come back at that point in time after we've gone to the market and have responses with a recommendation to you about what we do. The reason we're starting this far in advance is this policy is large, it's complex, it is unusual for a PLL policy to include munitions and explosives of concern. We worked very hard to negotiate that before, and so we're giving ourselves plenty of lead time so we don't end up at the last minute having to make a quick decision on what we want to do. We are looking for input, particularly from the landholding jurisdictions, as to the coverages that they think they want, the risks that they want covered, any peculiar endorsements that they would want on the policy. And I would suggest that any thoughts or ideas that you have in that regard, let Michael know. Feel free to contact me directly, and we will put that all into the equation when we go to the market. Thank you, sir.
Yes, members of the board, I just would like to add a couple of things. Barry has done, for Barry, a very brief presentation on the insurance. This is, as Barry indicated, relatively complex, and it's going to require some negotiation and some debate. It has already begun by the individual jurisdictions. We had a Brown Act meeting yesterday with them to discuss this specific item so that they would all be acquainted with what's coming down the track on this pollution legal liability coverage. We are going to take this further to the Administrative Committee also for consideration. If you have any specific questions today or any direction for staff with respect to this, we're happy to receive that, but I want you to be fully apprised that we intend to engage the Administrative Committee for all the detail required in making this a reality.
Any members of the board have any questions or comments right now? Any input? Yes, Jane, please.
Just a quick comment to thank you for bringing this, well in advance of us making a decision on something that's complex. Really helpful to get a little education, time to think. So thank you.
Here. Any other questions, comments from board members? Out to the public, any comments, questions by members of the public? Okay, back to the board. Have a motion to receive the report, please.
I'll move to receive the report.
Okay. And we have a motion by Gil Morton and a second by Jane Parker. All in favor, any discussion on the motion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next item we have is the Environmental Services Cooperative Agreement, ESCA update. Michael?
Yes, Chair Edelin and members of the board, I'm sure that all of you are aware of the progress that we've been making with the Environmental Services Cooperative Agreement. However, those have been periodic reports on special items that we've made recently, and it's been almost a year since we've actually done a full report that provides you with the updates on a number of the elements of the ESCA project. Stan Cook, who is the program manager for the ESCA remediation program, is here to provide more detail about the update. And for those of you who are new to the board and still getting acquainted with this, we are giving a bit more background today so that you'll have some of that background. And as Dan goes through the project status, if you have some of the legal questions, Barry Steinberg, of course, is here on any questions on a few of those items. As well, Christy Reimer, or Gimp Along as we currently tabbed her, is here to provide any responses from Arcadis, who's our contractor handling the work, as well as Chris Spill.
Thank you very much, Board. I'm glad to bring you an update on the ESCA remediation program. I've got the little button here. See if I can do this. The background I want to provide you a little background. I want to give you a project status. I want to talk a little bit about the finances. I want to talk to you about the work completed. Then I want to go into some specific areas. I want to talk about Parker Flats, the residential quality assurance work that we've done there. I want to talk to you about future East Garrison. I want to talk to you about the interim action ranges. Then I want to go into the documents that are coming up and relate them to the different portions of the base. So if you have an interest in a certain portion of the base, you can see which documents are coming up relative to that portion of the base. Then I want to give everybody a little bit of a primer on how they can take advantage of the community involvement activities that we have. Okay, I like to stop every presentation and remind us that when we first started this program, we were guided by what we call our Accord principles, and those are to acknowledge diverse views and voices, to communicate regularly with stakeholders, to be comprehensive in our education and information, to provide an opportunity for active community participation, to be responsive to personal communication and inquiries, and to be dedicated to inclusive community involvement and outreach. Those principles, I think the ESCA team has worked very hard to keep throughout this program, and we intend to keep it to the end. These are the ESCA munitions response areas by group. What that means is these are the ESCA properties, and they're color-coded. I'm going to try and use this pointer here. The first group, Group 1, are the red properties here. And maybe I should do it this way. Over in this corner is the ocean. This is the city of Seaside down here. Here's General Jim Moore Boulevard. And as we go to the south, we get to Delray Oaks. Here's South Boundary Road. As we come around here, this is South Boundary Road, and we get to Laguna Seca racetrack here. And if we proceed north, this is Barlow Canyon, and we go up through to East Garrison in this area. This is Reservation Road. Across the top here is Inner Garrison Road. Come down here, it's 8th Avenue. Here's Giggling Road. There's the DOD Center. As we come down here, this is Parker Flats Cutoff, and then Eucalyptus Road runs right through here. BLM headquarters is here. This is the future national monument, the extent of it in that area. Okay, so Group 1 is these parcels here. These were started by when we could get in the field and when we could get into our paperwork. That's why we called that Group 1. Group 2 is the next area we could get into and start processing our paperwork and get into the field. Group 3 are these blue properties here, and Group 4 are the yellow properties here. Okay, so as I talk about documents, they're grouped, they're presented by groups of the documents that are coming up. So I won't have this slide available. I can go back to it if we need to, but over here is, on this side of the room, is a poster. Very similar. You'll notice the green and white hatches. It's not, green and white hash marks are not here, but this is pretty much the same map. So if you need to refer back to a group, it's over here. Okay, next. These are the current standings of the ESCA funds as of January 1, 2013. The original amount allocated is over on this side. The accruals as of 2013 are on this side. You can see that of the $97,728,609 that were allocated for the ESCA, all portions of the ESCA, $70,037,329 were accrued as of January 1, 2013. That left the remainder in the ESCA of $27,691 and $27,691,280. Now, this also includes an area here. When I say work performed, that applies to this column here. These are the work performed under the commutation account. Okay. Next. Oh, that's me. Okay, to break that down a little further, the planned remedial investigation field work is 98% complete. I've got a big note under the bottom that work, the data has been presented to the regulatory agencies who evaluate the residual risk after the field work is done. This is the field work we know of, the 98%. The regulators can make us go back and provide additional field work at any time. We have planned habitat restoration and monitoring. You'll see a little bit more about this, but we're 70% complete with that. Of the total munitions items removed in the 6 years we've been here, we've had over 4,950. That's very close to 5,000 munition items that have been removed from those 3,340 acres of the Environmental Services Cooperative Agreement properties. The total munitions debris that's been removed is over 56,000 pounds. Total trash and other debris as we work through that, these are almost all involved digging a hole, is 118,000 pounds. So there's been a lot of work that's been done in the last 6 years. I'm going to focus on, take us to Parker Flats here. Let me orient us. Here's Giggling Road in this picture. Here's 8th Avenue. This is Parker Flats Cutoff. So there's the DOD building. It's south of the DOD building. We did a level 1 initial evaluation for our residential quality assurance, the RQA. We did that on 182 acres here in yellow. Okay. After we finished that, we recommended that additional work, we didn't recommend, the regulators recommended that additional work be done in this area, small area, and this other red area that's just north of Parker Flats Road. We had a public meeting last September 20th and explained what the level 2A approach would be, and that would be limbing up the trees, cutting the brush in the area, and then taking our digital geophysical mapping equipment in there and getting as close as we could to those trees and to do a further confirmation of what had been done in that area. So the results there are that we finished that field work in March last month. We've given the data, or we're starting to give the data to the regulators so they can evaluate it, but we don't know what they're going to, if they're going to ask us to go to a level 3 in any of those areas. It doesn't look likely, but we don't know. So when we were doing that work, we found 1 mech item. We found 20 pounds of munitions debris and over 500 pounds of other debris. I'm going to move us to Future East Garrison. Future East Garrison is, here's the project, the boundaries of Future East Garrison. It's the blue line. The yellow area here on the west side of that is Barlow Canyon Road. So we have 2 areas that are habitat areas, one on the west side of Barlow Canyon, one on the east side. And this center area is potentially future residential area. East of Barlow Canyon Road, we have completed that area. West of Barlow Canyon Road, we have about 11 acres remaining. The residential area, we have about 7 acres remaining. Our anticipated fieldwork completion is this month for that area. Then that goes to the regulators for evaluation. In these areas, we found over 180 mech items, over 7,600 pounds of munition debris have been collected, and over 11,000 pounds of other debris have been taken out of that area. Okay, the interim action ranges. I want to talk about this. I do not have a map. I'm sorry, but I wanted to show you what was going on there. I thought that was more important than a map, so I'm going to use our map on this side of the room. That blue and white hashed area that's just above Nicole's head is the interim action ranges. That contains 2 ranges, one on the west side, range 47, and one on the east side, range 44. We've been working in there quite a bit. It's been very extensive. We went into first to ranges 44 and 47 and cut the vegetation in transects to try and define the limits of the special case areas that had been left behind. Because the Army did go in here and do a surface clearance after a burn in the past, then they went in and did most of it to depth. There were areas that were large anomalies, meaning big piles of metal that were buried under the ground that were very difficult to do. We took over the cleanup in this area under the ESCA. Those special case areas, they were called, we went in and investigated those, okay? So in range 44, we found 66 millimeter rockets, okay? In that area, we cut the vegetation. We were able to dig those anomalies singly, find them, identify them singly, and go in and dig those. So it wasn't as invasive. Range 47 is a former 40 millimeter grenade range. In there, we did our transects. We found that there were large areas that needed excavation and sifting. The material was so mixed, or the soil was so mixed with the metallic material in there. So we completed that. Took about 14 acres, about 14 acres. We scraped off the top 6 inches, set it aside because it has your seed bank and your nutrients. We sifted it and then set it aside. We then pulled that soil down to 2 feet deep in some areas, which was all sifted, set aside. We did digital geophysical mapping of the bottom of the hole. We were able to find individual anomalies. Those were dug. After we dug those anomalies, we then got approval from the regulators. We then replaced the subsoil and the topsoil. We also planted over 46,000 seedlings that were sprouted in 3 local nurseries in the area, and so the habitat restoration is pretty extensive in those 14 acres. What did we find? We found 3,600 munition items in that area. Those are 40 millimeter grenades, predominantly. They're sensitively fused. If a habitat worker or anybody, not picking on habitat workers, but if anybody were to bump them, there is the potential that those could explode because they're sensitively fused. Okay. In this area, we got 44,000 pounds of munitions debris and 11,000 pounds of other debris. Okay, by groups. This group 1, which is the red area over there, we have a draft RIFS report that will be coming out in August. For group 2, which is the green areas on that map over there, we have a final RIFS report that will be out in February. Also in group 2, we have a proposed plan that should be in June. For the interim action ranges, that's the blue and white ones that are on this blue and white parcel that's on this map. And that we'll have a draft RIFS report in June. And then for the interim action ranges, we'll have a draft RIFS report in October. The group 4 properties, which are in East Garrison, the draft RIFS report will be available in October. For community involvement, next month in May, we hope to have an ESCA informal community workshop to talk you through some of the upcoming work that we will be doing. We will be at the Theater Classic next week. Laura will be manning a booth. We share that booth with BLM to provide outreach on what the ESCA is doing and provide information. We'll be at April 22nd. We'll be at CSUMB Earth Day. That's another great outreach for us. We meet a lot of the students there. We'll be at the Army Nature Walk on May 11th. The Army Community Involvement Workshop, they now make them mobile workshops, that will be at the one at July 13th. And then we have our bi-monthly Fort Ord users working groups that continue. Okay, to recap, I've given you background on the remedial investigation field work and that it's nearing completion. That still means that the regulars have to review that data. We could be asked to go back there, but of the known work that we expected to do, we're nearing completion. Future work, predominantly paperwork, and the dates were provided for that paperwork. Financial update, we provided that to you. Now, how do you find out more about us or keep up with it, what we're doing? Here's our community resources. We can be accessed indirectly through the FORA website, but you can go directly to the www.foraescacrp.com website and pull these presentations. This presentation, I think, will be up there Monday, or maybe up there now, and past presentations that we've done in the Army's community involvement workshops or other presentations to the community. You can also get links to the key documents in the ESCA. We're on Facebook and Twitter. We've got our weekly hotline updates. That's great because if you're out in the field and you're riding your bicycle or something and you want to know what the status is, where we're working, you can call that number at any time, and it's got a 5-minute little pre-recorded message that Laura tells you what's going on. We have maps showing the access corridors. They're available on our website. They're also available at kiosk on all of the access corridors and as you come into the ESCA properties. We have a dedicated email, esca@fora.org. You can send comments to documents to us. We can start preparing your answers, but official comments on circle of documents that are for the ESCA, you have to send to us by mail with a wet signature on it, and then so we can load those up to the administrative record. And that's, there's our address right there, FORA's address. And that concludes my update. Thank you very much.
Yes, Chair Edelin and members of the board, in addition to Stan's report, there were a couple of questions that had popped up from board members this week on the ESCA. One was, what do we think the actual shutdown time will be for this work that we are doing? Well, the paperwork that Stan described and all the documents that you'll be seeing will take a bit of time to complete. There are some specific time periods that are going to be required for each to be out in the public for review. We do believe, based on all of the requirements that we have, that the paperwork should be complete next year, and then past that, there will also need to be some sign-off and processing for property transfers, and that the jurisdictions who are still affected should anticipate transfers in 2015. Also, Stan went through and talked about the finances of the ESCA grant. Understand that what we purchased, in essence, was an $82 million insurance policy. That money is really gone, even though we're reporting how much gets billed against it. There are other costs related to that $82 million that don't wind up showing on the progress payment side, because this is an insurance policy that includes the insurance cost for the premium and the coverage and all the due diligence that they're required to do under these contracts. So we've mentioned this before, but just a reminder, and that was a question from one of the board members. Thought everyone should hear those two.
Any further questions by members of the board? Yes, Nancy.
They will all be finished at approximately the same time. It's because of the paperwork. Because until the regulators have sent us a letter saying there's no further work required, those sites are considered open and active. Those dates, those are documents that are available. Bear with me. Oh, these dates, are you talking about those? Those are the documents, those specific documents that pertain to those properties when they will be available for the public to review them. I'm sorry if that was confusing.
Okay. Other questions? Yes, Jane.
I wonder if when you were talking about the Parker Flats, you talked about you did a level 1, and then the regulators said go into these particular areas and go to level 2.
Yes.
And they might come back and tell us we have to go to level 3. Could you just explain what level 1, 2, and 3 are?
Okay. Level 1 is to, let me go back to that. We've got an illustration. Let's use it. This entire property has received munitions remediation work over the whole property. The southern portion of it here has received, below this, where this hash line is, this was done by the Army, and the portion north of that was done by the ESCA team. So we have lots of data on the materials that were found. Before, there wasn't complete data set on this area. That data set was presented to the regulators, and they looked at it now for the first time. What were the patterns of potential use out there, and what were the questions that were left in their mind? That's where these red areas come in. Level 1 was a paperwork exercise after the cleanup. Level 2 is where do they have additional concerns, and that's where we focus our second look, if you will. And this red area is the second look. Okay. The third of this area, there may be a subset of that still has additional questions in it. If there are, that will be where we'll do our third look, or which would be level 3. Okay. So the idea here is trying to be as minimally invasive to the site, but yet provide all the assurances that the regulators want. So you start with the whole site, look at it, where the questions remain. You've got a lot less of impact on the site if you look at it again here. Then of that, what little portion of that still has questions? If at level 2, all their questions are answered, we will not go to level 3. Okay.
Supervisor, yeah, this 3-level process is one that has evolved in regular discussions back and forth with both the California Department of Toxic Substances Control and the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Both of them have been seeking for years, originally starting with the Strategic Management Analysis Resources team and technology team from years ago on how to move forward on areas to allow sensitive uses. And at one point, those regulatory agencies required a fairly denuding of the property that would require multiple lifts and 12-inch lifts, 12-inch lift, 12-inch lift until you get to clearance. And this new process that has levels allows a deliberative process that looks at the data first, a data-driven process that then focuses on areas to do a little additional investigation and review, and then a final, if you really have to do the invasive work, then to get to that. And that's the process we've been using. It's a process now that the state of California believes, and again, this is one of those areas where Fort Ord is the guinea pig, that they believe the work we're doing here is extraordinary in terms of how it can be applied other places. And so they've asked us to do additional detail, and the folks at Arcadis and Weston have taken a few extra steps to assist the state in trying to define how this would, sensitive use clearances would occur in other places.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm aware of that. It wasn't explained, and I just thought for people who didn't know, it would be good. So the level 1 is essentially looking at data. Level 2 is going in, actually in the field, and doing some of that, what's that?
Digital geophysical mapping with the sled
right,
and the
with
towed
the
array.
thing where you can see magically below the surface. And then level 3 is when you have to go dig up.
Yeah, you have to
stuff.
say we can't get to the answers that give the regulatory agencies the assurances they want, so we got to dig a hole.
Right.
A bigger hole.
Other questions by board members?
Chair Edlin.
Yes, Tom, please.
Question for you, Stan. Is the Veterans Cemetery in Group 1?
The Veterans Cemetery is in Group 1.
Has the physical remediation work been completed for that footprint?
The physical remediation work has been finished for that. The Veterans Cemetery burial area, okay, not the entire portion, but the burial area we have received regulatory site closure for that area.
And to what depth has the clearance been certified, or whatever the paperwork says?
We've used, the depth question, we've used the way to approach it is the best available detection technology. Okay, that has been used on the site and approved by the regulatory agencies as the proper equipment to use there. We go to, when we find a signal, we go to depth, which means that if we find a signal, we prosecute it till we find it. We don't go to a certain depth and stop. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Kind of, sort of. I'm, thinking about a burial site and grave diggers digging graves down 6 feet, 8 feet, and I'd hate for any of them to be blown to smithereens because the best available technology only went to 4 feet, say.
There's no munitions cleanup work that I have ever heard of and has ever guaranteed that everything will be removed from a munitions site. There's a land use control implementation plan that's in place that works with the city's ordinances requiring that if more than 10 cubic yards of soil are removed on a site, there has to be construction support done for that work, which means your munitions technicians come back and work ahead of or with or keep an eye on the work that's being done for that construction.
Thank you. Other questions by board members? Okay, saying none, out to the public. Any questions by members of the public? Saying none, back to the board. I'm sorry.
I think Eric has one.
Sorry, sir. Yeah, come on, please. Yeah.
My name is Eric Peterson. I just have two quick questions. One is, does this mean that there's going to be more areas able to be opened for use by the public? And the other is an opinion question. I realize somewhat subjective, but I was just kind of been wondering if this could have been done better or faster if an American company had been hired instead of a foreign company. Thank you.
Any other questions by members of the public? We have another one coming. Yeah. If there are other questions, when we have these questions, if everybody just sort of move forward to save some time, we really enjoy being together as long as we can, but I'm trying to move things along somewhat. Please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Edlin. I'll be brief. My name is Mike Weaver. I'm with the FOCAG, and for your reading enjoyment, I brought the record of decision today for Parker Flats that lists what was found there and the depth that was cleared to 4 feet. The Sean stats were used, which are good down to about 2.5 feet, and we're talking about going down over 6 feet. So this is an official document. I don't know, a lot of you are new. You may not have had an opportunity to read this yet, but this is here, and it's for the record today. I'll put it here. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Any other members of the public wishing to address the board? Ask questions? Say none. Back to the board. Any other final comments? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
I'll move we accept the report.
Okay, and second, we have a motion by Councilwoman Gail Morton and a second by Councilman Dennis Alexander to accept the report. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is the FORA legal representation. There's a staff recommendation to authorize the executive officer to execute a contract with the law offices of Alan Walther, not to exceed $24,950 for review of the base reuse plan actions, and to, a staff recommendation to authorize the executive officer to execute a contract with John Giffen of Kennedy, Archer, and Giffen to serve as authority counsel. I believe, Michael, do you have this?
Yes, Chair Edelin and members of the board, both of these items are also recommended by the Executive Committee for your adoption. I would like to just note that in each case, the selection of these two individuals was at the direction of the Fort Ord Reuse Authority Board, at least the selection of counsel in each of these cases. John Giffen is here if you have any specific questions about his contract or items. As well, Alan Waltner is here. Since some of the board members have not met Alan Waltner from his previous work with the Fort Ord Reuse Authority, Alan would like to just introduce himself and give you 45 seconds.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm Alan Waltner, an environmental and land use attorney from San Francisco. I've been practicing in these subject areas for nearly 35 years now in a variety of settings, most recently with the corporate firm of Bingham McCutcheon as a land use partner, but also in other contexts, including in-house at the University of California for a number of years, and also as outside counsel. I've worked on several hundred CEQA documents and dozens of specific plans, general plans, many of them complex like this base reuse plan is. My first involvement in this particular base reuse was about 20 years ago when I was asked by the City of Marina to review the Army's EIS on the transfer. And then more recently, I've helped Mr. Hulemard and staff 5 years ago on the beginning stages of the reassessment process, and I would be delighted to continue that involvement. Thank you.
Yes, Chair Edel, members of the board, you could either take both of these items together or you can take them individually, but both of them are within the budget authorization, and the one for Alan Waltner would not exceed $24,950. The one with John Giffen is much more complex.
There is a very good staff report there. Does any member of the board have any questions at all on any of those two items? Yes, Jane, please.
No question, but a comment. I wanted to just thank Supervisor Potter for bringing forth this issue to really take another look at the CEQA, our CEQA status, and the status of our environmental review, so that we know we're on solid ground going forward. And I'm pleased to learn about Mr. Waltner's experience. It seems it's quite impressive. I think he'll do a good job for us. It would have been nice to have some kind of information about him in the packet so that we could have known, but thank you.
It's a great idea. As much as we enjoy collecting lawsuits, maybe this might preclude a few of the lawsuits in the future. Any other questions by members of the board? Saying none out to the public, any questions by members of the public? Okay, back to the board. We have the two staff recommendations. I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion for both to go together.
Okay, we have a motion by the Mayor of Salinas and a second by Supervisor Potter. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, signify by saying aye. I'm sorry?
Aye.
What? I neglected to ask for public comment on the motion. Any member of the public have any comment on the motion? I thought I did. Michael? Okay, so we have all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Yep, senior moment. Okay, the next we have the base reuse plan, post-reassessment follow-up, Category 1. Michael?
Yes, Chair Edel and Darren McBain will take us through this process. I want to at least compliment Darren before he starts, because Jane Haynes made it a point to note to me the great work that Darren McBain did in helping the ad hoc committee go through this process last week.
I'm going to give him a hand. I think he did a great job.
Thank you. I stand on the shoulders of giants. Chairman Edelin, members of the board, as you know, Category 1 of the reassessment report, the subject of this item, has to do with items, corrections that are intended to be very much non-substantive, corrections to typographical errors, editorial errors, outdated references, and clarifications. And Category 1 consists of corrections to text in the original base reuse plan and figures, also known as maps from the original base reuse plan. This first slide here that we have up on the screen, before we turn to a few of the details of the item before you tonight and the Category 1 materials, we thought it would be helpful to give you a brief overview of the workflow of post-reassessment categories as it currently stands based on the board's unanimous vote on March 22nd. What you see here is a brief breakdown, a simplified breakdown of the different categories from the reassessment report and an intermediate step that they would go through for formation of recommendations before being considered by the full board. Category 1, primarily Category 4, but also Category 1 is being considered currently by the Post-Reassessment Advisory Committee, or PRAC. Category 2 will be the primary subject of the materials that will be undergoing review by Mr. Waltner as Special Legal Counsel for CEQA and Land Use Review. There will be some latitude for other actions and options to be considered by Mr. Waltner as well, but as it currently stands, Category 2 is the primary subject matter that has been identified for his review. Category 3, the implementation of incomplete policies and programs is going to be further reviewed by Administrative Committee and FORA staff, and Category 5 FORA procedures and operations. Currently, there's no intermediate step identified, and that would just be considered by the FORA board, either at the post-reassessment workshop number 3 or at a different future board meeting. As with all of these items that you see before you, there's an intermediate step for formation of recommendations, and then each of these items would be considered by the FORA board, either at workshop number 3 or at a subsequent future board meeting of a different kind, depending on the timing of the third board workshop and how much progress has been made on a given category of action items by that time. That's just a brief overview of the process, because we know that there's been quite a bit of change and evolution of the process, and we thought it may have become somewhat convoluted or confusing, so hopefully this brief flowchart will help provide some clarification of it. Turning now to the board report for today, as you'll notice in the board report, starting on page 21 of your packet, discussed on page 1 of the board report, at the March 22nd board meeting / workshop, among other actions, the board did 2 primary things with regard to Category 1. First is that the board took a second vote to bring back before and after maps relating to incorporation of the Category 1 corrections to the original base reuse plan figures. So basically to show the original base reuse plan figure and then what the figure would look like with the Category 1 corrections incorporated into it. The second action was to endorse the board chair's appointment of an advisory committee to look primarily at Category 4 topics and options, the more substantive policy direction items from the reassessment report, but also to include in its scope Category 1 options and discussion items with the goal of identifying, resolving, and reaching consensus as to a recommendation for addressing concerns and issues that were identified by board members and others at the previous board meeting, as well as any other issues and current concerns that may still be out there and that had not yet been identified in previous discussions. The idea being for this to take place in a smaller working group setting where it would be more possible to work through what exactly the concerns were and some possible ways of resolving them. Regarding action 1 from March 22nd that I just described from the first page of your board report, the second vote regarding before and after maps, attachment A to your board report today, to your packet, represents staff's best effort to respond to the board's request for before and after maps, given that there are approximately 40 figures that are the subject of these changes. They only exist on paper or as scans of paper documents, which is to say that there's no known electronic data that's available to edit as far as in AutoCAD format or as a geographic information system document. There's nothing like that that has been identified where it would be possible to open up the electronic data, make some edits, incorporating those corrections that were identified in the reassessment report, and then to print out the new map. They only exist on paper, and these are documents from the 1990s. Also, previously, board members expressed concern that they had not received the original base reuse plan figures when the Category 1 corrections were brought forward for board review at the March 15th board meeting. So this is what you see before you today is an effort to show you the original base reuse plan figure with the corrections from the reassessment report shown alongside in order to show exactly what the existing baseline condition is, and then the observations that the reassessment report made in terms of identifying things that were not perfect or that are out of date with those figures. But primarily, and most importantly, the item before you today for discussion as an information item is currently in committee for further review of the reassessment report's suggested corrections and to form a recommendation for next steps. So for all these reasons, the practical approach, it seemed to us as staff, would be to simply superimpose upon the original figure from the base reuse plan those corrections from the reassessment report as an interim measure. So that's what we have before you today as attachment A to your packet, which was previously circulated electronically as a color PDF, and also as an insert to your reassessment binder that was put out on your desk today under Category 1. It's the full color figures of the base reuse plan with the, for now, with the notes from the reassessment report simply superimposed onto the face of each figure. Concerning the second action listed on page 1 of the board report for this item, the second bullet point from the March 22nd board workshop, which was appointment of a committee to look at categories 4 primarily, but also category 1. The Post-Reassessment Advisory Committee, or PRAC, held its first meeting on April 5th. It was attended by approximately 12 members of the public. Committee members agreed with most of the report's category 1 text corrections or slight variations to the corrections the way they were originally written in the reassessment report. Committee members requested follow-up clarification regarding the details of several of the corrections. Committee members indicated support for prioritizing a discussion of the substance, the subject matter of several Category 1 items as part of the future Category 4 discussion of substantive policy issues. A couple of examples of that were provision of future enhanced water supply for future projects and encouragement of thoughtful open space planning as a major factor when planning and developing new neighborhoods and districts. So those were just a couple of items that committee members discussed as needing to be addressed under Category 1, but also meriting further review on a policy basis when we get to the Category 4 discussion. There was a robust discussion of the Category 1 figure corrections. Board members discussed, committee members discussed developing an approach of pulling out the figures where the reassessment report recommended more than just typo corrections or formatting fixes, prioritizing those that involved more substantive, not substantive per se, but in terms of changing the substance of the map, but substantive in the sense of bringing it up to date with existing or current conditions, not in terms of making changes that aren't warranted by things that have occurred previously, but just to bring it up to date with current understandings of things that should be shown graphically. So board members and committee members discuss prioritizing those that are that have a little bit more substance to it for production of an up-to-date modern figure, just bringing it up to date to show existing conditions or how things have changed since the original base reuse plan. Possibly leveraging the use of figures that were prepared for the scoping report in 2012 during the reassessment process, but also maintaining the original base reuse plan figure for historical context alongside the new one. So that was a process that was discussed for making corrections to the figures in the base reuse plan in a way that captures all of the Category 1 observations, but also recognizing that there is some value to maintaining the original figure from the base reuse plan in some cases for historical context. Committee members and staff also discussed taking the transportation-related figures and essentially kind of placing those in a separate pile, placing them on hold for purposes of Category 1, but addressing them more comprehensively under Category 2 of the reassessment report process, and including review for any possible need for additional CEQA clearance as part of that Category 2 review. Due to time constraints, just the fact that there was only so much time to get through a lot of material, the committee made it approximately halfway through the figure corrections and then put the discussion on hold in order to have an initial discussion of Category 4. Members discussed some of the factors and considerations that committee members may wish to take into account when developing Category 4 action item priorities for the full board's consideration. Members identified few resources, some resources requested from staff for the next meeting as a potential tool for forming those priority recommendations. Those included things such as previous annual reports or a summary of annual reports, which is a document that FORA puts out every year, in addition to a few other things like public comment summaries from the reassessment process, which are all documented through the scoping report. The next meeting of the PRAC will be on April 19th. The agenda and the packet will go out on Monday. And there's a potential goal in the meantime that seems realistic for PRAC meeting number 2 of being able to complete the Category 1 discussion, provide a recommendation for staff to bring back before the full board. may also be very reasonable and plausible for the committee to be able to continue with a very substantial discussion and make substantial progress of Category 4 policy direction topics and considerations. Slide number 2, please. We thought it would be helpful to provide a recap of some dates that have gone by in terms of making progress through the post-reassessment process, and some dates that we still have ahead of us, realizing that it may have gotten a little bit confusing by now with some overlap between what the committee is looking at and what the board has previously done and remains to do with the post-reassessment process. So you see at the top half of this slide some dates and some accomplishments that have already been achieved at this point through April 5th, the PRAC meeting that was held last week, and where we are today, April 12th, with a status report. As I mentioned, on April 19th, which is Friday of next week, a week from today, the PRAC will hold its second meeting, and then subject to committee members' availability or other factors, it seems possible that early May would be potentially a very workable date to hold a third committee meeting. May 10th, the board will be holding its regularly scheduled meeting, and on May 17th, that's a date that we have preliminarily, tentatively identified as a potential date for a third workshop. As you know, we've envisioned the post-reassessment workshop series to be a series of 3, although there's always the potential to extend the series of workshops if it seems warranted or if there's a great deal more work to be done. So there's a potential of needing to take that third workshop and, based on how things are going in committee discussion, possibly push that out a little bit later, although May 24th, I believe, is the day before the Memorial Day weekend, and that's a consideration that people may not be available, but lacking that, some date in early June might be very possible or workable as well. But May 17th, previously in the last 1 or 2 board reports, we've identified that as possibly a date that folks would find to be workable. Just to recap, the reassessment report's suggested Category 1 corrections are currently undergoing committee review and making good progress. It should be possible for the committee to complete its discussion of Category 1 at its next meeting and provide a recommendation to the full board as early, possibly as the next board meeting. What we have before you today is primarily an information item, although it's technically an information action item in case the board has any direction or input that they would like to provide to staff or for staff to provide to the committee. We would welcome that, and that's a summary of where we are with Category 1 items, and with that, I'll turn it over to the board for discussion or questions.
Thank you, Darren. A good briefing. Any questions by members of the board? Seeing none, out to the public. Any questions by members of the public? Yeah, back to the board again. Darren, you did a great job. Just to recap a little bit, we met 3 hours last Friday, and it was very respectful. Everybody worked together, harmonious, and so forth. I was wondering if we were in FORA still or whatever. It worked very, very well. We'll be meeting again next Friday for 3 hours in the morning. Then we'll be meeting another Friday for 3 hours and so forth. We really enjoy one another's company, but I do want to. It was a lot of hard work, and it was fast and furious, and a lot of comments were made, and a lot of compromises were made, and it bodes well for the organization. I do appreciate the members that volunteered for that ad hoc committee. You volunteered for a lot of work, and I appreciate all the work you're doing, and I'm sure it'll pan out in the long run. Okay, if I could have a motion to receive the report, please. Okay.
Second.
Okay. Mayor Camp is the maker of the motion, and the second is Councilwoman Morton. Okay. All in favor signify by saying aye. Anybody opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay, the next is the Fort Ord Reuse Authority Master Resolution. We will be deleting 7E3 at the request of the Sierra Club. So again, just cross off 7.3E. We'll be discussing 7E, I, double I, and 4. So, Michael, you have this one, please.
Yes, Chair, I'll try to make this a direct and brief presentation at the request of Councilwoman Morton.
Thank you.
Item 7E1 offers an opportunity for the board members to review the Fort Ord Reuse Authority's settlement agreement and notification process. That's included in the board report. I don't believe I need to add to that part of the report. Item number 2 is to consider 23 typographical corrections that were proposed by the Sierra Club and agreed to by FORA staff and council. Item number 4 is consider conflict of interest code modifications, and that particular section, we're only modifying it to add names of individuals that should be doing the Form 700 reporting, and one other typographical change. And so the staff recommendation is with deleting item 7E3, it would be to approve item 7E2 and 7E4.
Okay. Any questions by members of the board? Pretty straightforward. Any questions by members of the public? Okay, back to the board. May I have a motion, please? Okay, we have Councilman Alvin Edwards making the motion, and Supervisor Potter is the second of the motion. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Motion carries. We figured that before the deletion of 3I, we'd be here for about 2 hours discussing that. So thank you, Sierra Club. We owe you at least a beer. Okay. 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 Next, we have the Capital Improvement Program Review, Phase 2 Study. I received 4 fees calculation report. Jonathan, I believe that's yours.
Yes. Board members, you have at your tables attachment A to item 7F. And this is the summary report from EPS. And I'll just go through it briefly and go on to the second recommendation before you today as well. And I've got it up here on the screen. I'm just kind of flow to the beginning of it. Okay, so EPS is the selected consultant who is it's been preparing this phase 2 study and running the calculation of the formula for board consideration. And just to go through their analysis today, they have a summary of the different the current analytical basis, the results and implications, and their caveats. And under the first topic, under land use absorption, their current analytic basis is that the current analysis is based on the adopted CIP development forecast originally provided by 4 member jurisdictions. And the CIP development forecasts have standing since they were adopted by the board in the previous year. And their results implications of the land use absorption analysis, it generates high levels of revenue associated with the absorption, particularly land sales and property taxes. The development and capital improvements are fully calibrated to Fort Ord build-out. It results in a significant CFD tax and fee policy reduction for the new residential unit fee, 35% reduction. It would be approximately $22,500, slightly less than that per unit. And then their caveats that they've listed include that the formulaic approach is silent on absorption assumptions. CIP development forecasts have been unrealistic in the past. Development absorption, most significant driver of the formula results, in particular with the land sales revenue and property tax revenues and HCP costs. If you have a higher absorption schedule, those costs are, the HCP costs are lowered and the land sales revenues and property taxes are higher. Utilization of absorption assumptions are consistent with the market study conclusions. That would, if we use the market study conclusions, it would result in a different lowering of the CFD special tax, approximately 10% or less. Their second analysis was under the property tax item, and the analysis includes property tax revenues generated from July 1st, 2012 through FORA's legislated sunset of June 30th, 2020. The results and implications of that analysis are to the extent absorption extends beyond 2020, the formula does not capture any property tax revenue beyond the current anticipated FORA sunset. And then their caveats listed were if legislated FORA sunset date was extended again, the formula would capture additional property tax revenue through the revised FORA sunset. If the legislated sunset date is not extended, no established mechanism for post-2020 collection of the property tax revenue exists. So on to their third analysis item, land sales revenue. And their current analysis, the adopted CIP development forecast assumes that all land transferred to private ownership is completed by 2020. The analysis also assumes land value will be equal to 10% of the finished real estate value. And the results of that analysis generates over $55 million in projected future land sale revenue through 2020. And the results appear unrealistic. For example, current analysis identifies $11 million in land sale revenue for fiscal year 2012-13. Their caveats are it relies on highly aggressive development forecast. The land value assumptions reflect typical industry standards, which may be overstated relative to forward development. Also, the risk of strategic investment of land sale revenue may reduce FORA share in the future. It depends on how the deals are structured, but there is a tendency for developments, for jurisdictions to collect their land sale value out of participation payments of the profitability of a development versus an upfront land sale, which FORA would typically collect. And then also 50% of current land sale revenue projections were assumed. It would result in a tax rate reduction of approximately 23% versus the 35%, which is the current analysis. And under the fourth item, the Community Facilities District Special Tax Revenue, their analysis was it assumes collection of CFD special tax through build-out, currently assumed to be 2020. The analysis uses build-out development to calculate CFD special tax revenue generated because this level of development is coincident with the full set of CIP improvements in the FORA FY 12-13 CIP. The results and implications of the analysis are that it includes CFD revenue for all future development. If only a portion of the CFD revenue is included, the formula would result in a lower tax rate reduction. Their caveats include the realistic absorption assumptions may necessitate developer fee / CFD replacement mechanisms to fund CIP improvements subsequent to FORA's legislated sunset. Essentially here, the FORA CFD, as currently enacted, it would dissolve when FORA dissolves, or the year 2051, whichever occurs first. The other caveat is if FORA legislated sunset extended formula, if FORA's legislated sunset was extended, the formula is unclear as to how the CFD special tax should be computed, and they list here 3 different approaches. One approach might be continue utilizing the build-out forecast to derive CFD revenue available to fund full CIP consistent with build-out development levels. Another approach is to revise the formula to permit reduction of CIP expenditures to match development anticipated within FORA timeframe. And another option could be otherwise revise the formula to clarify timeframe of assumed CFD special tax collection and revenue assumptions. And then the final analysis item was the Habitat Conservation Plan. And in the analysis, they noted the HCP endowment funding required is driven by land use absorption assumptions. So if the absorptions are lower, or if the absorption is higher, then the HCP costs are typically lower. If the absorption rate, if you would assume a lower absorption rate, the cost would be higher. And the reason for that is basically in the period when you're capitalizing the HCP, you're also funding HCP requirements as you're building the endowment levels higher, so that only occurs in a lower absorption assumption. And they also noted the endowment is capitalized using an assumed maximum of 25% of CFD revenues may be dedicated to HCP endowment. It assumes a payout rate of 4.5% once the endowments are established. and includes an $18.8 million contingency for the HCP, and that's to account for a lower payout rate. And the results implications of that analysis is then the endowment funding approach minimized by land use absorption assumptions utilized, but reflects full contingency amount. The endowment funding requirement includes full HCP contingency, reflecting potential for lower payout rates, lower absorption, and buffer to account for reduced tax rate and slower HCP endowment capitalization. And their caveats included, if the fee was lowered significantly, FORA will need to dedicate a higher percentage of CFD revenues to the HCP, reducing the amount available to fund other capital projects. Alternatively, FORA could continue to dedicate 25% of CFD revenues to the HCP, resulting in a longer capitalization period and higher overall CFD funding requirement for the HCP. Another caveat was HCP funding requirement estimate is contingent on development absorption assumptions. If the development absorption is slower than the CIP forecast, will result in a higher overall CFD funding requirement for the HCP. And then finally, funding requirements also contingent on payout rate achieved. A lower payout rate would require additional CFD funding. And so taking their analysis forward, based on the development absorption schedule in the adopted, approved current FORA CIP, the calculation results in a recommended 35.6% decrease in the fee from a current rate for new residential of $34,610 per unit to $22,290 a unit. And they went through and have this summary table, table 2 within the packet. It breaks down the capital improvement program and other costs, and then the funding sources and the resulting percentage change to match the CIP program costs with the revenue sources. And I'll just point out here that you'll see under the HCP endowment 2 line items. The first one is the $36.3 million cost of the HCP endowment, and then also the contingency, the $18.8 million. And also noted in the cost column, there's a Preston Park loan repayment of $18.2 million, and that is just the current loan on Preston Park. So it's shown here because it's going to be offset by the land sales proceeds line item and the cost item, the $77 million. So the $18 million is a deduct from that number. It's just shown here in the summary table to point that out. Under the estimated sources of funds, just to point out the current balance of the HCP endowments, $4.5 million. Existing fund balances are $1.3 million. There's an assumption here that FORA would achieve around $1 million in future grants. The CSU mitigation payments currently would be collected of $327,000. The land sales revenue total would be $77 million. And the FORA property tax revenues based on FORA's current collection on the property taxes on Fort Ord over this period would be $14.5 million. And so that came to a total expenditures of $255 million and other revenue sources of $99 million. And so the fee would make up the difference between the two. And from the current rate of the fee, based on the absorption, it would need to go down by 64.4% to match and calibrate those numbers. And just a final slide here on the analysis. The Administrative Committee at its previous meeting recommended some further analysis on if you assumed a different payout rate on the HCP contingency, what would the effect be on either essentially reducing the contingency that's in the current FORA CIP of $18.8 million. And so they showed 3 alternatives. The first alternative is the current payout rate. So if you assume a 4.5% payout rate, the endowment requirements $32 million, and that's subtracting the 34 minus the existing balance of $4.5 million. And then the second alternative is to assume a payout rate of 3.5%. And so the HCP funding requirement would be $39 million. So the difference between the two, $7 million. You could reduce the contingency from $18.8 million to $11.8 million. under that scenario. And then the third scenario is assuming a payout rate of 2%. And so under that scenario, the HCP cost requirement would be $64 million, which is much higher than our current assumption of $18.8 million contingency. Now we're talking about increasing a contingency in that scenario. So that was the depths of the analysis. As far as the second action before the board today, the second item recommendation is to review or consider the draft resolution in the packet. And the only real scenario before the board, if you choose to take an action on the resolution, is the provided analysis of the current CIP calculation, which is the 35% reduction. We could also take direction from the board as far as where you'd like to see this formula go from here. So I'll end it there and just be here for any questions.
Any questions by members of the board? Jane.
So I have, well, a couple questions. One is that, and maybe it's a comment, that this is a lot to absorb in a few minutes and to make a fairly weighty decision. So I would hope that we're not going to take action on this today, but rather have a discussion. One thing I'm concerned about is the fact that this board was not alerted to the fact that there was a discussion going on about the absorption rates. If you look at, I brought a copy of last month's board report that does indicate that that there was a question being discussed at the administrative committee that the consultant had recommended the current market study rate of absorption, and that members of the administrative committee, who are not sitting members of this board, they're not policymakers, ended up having that discussion in the administrative committee, and there's no indication in our board report today that there was ever an issue. So I have a real concern about that. I think that's a discussion that should rightfully take place at this board.
Jonathan, do you want to reply to that, please?
So the administrative committee has seen a number of different scenarios that the consultant produced on the formula, and we've received a number of suggestions on tweaking the formula over the past couple of months. And so what is included in the board packet is the recommended formula approach as far as absorption goes by the administrative committee at their last meeting.
Jane?
Thank you. So I have a question about if we were to go forward with this rather significant, 35% decrease in the rates. What is the? It's referenced slightly in here, I think, in the little run through that Jonathan gave us. But what impact is that going to have on our ability to complete our CIP?
Jonathan.
So the formula will be recalculated next spring, 2014, and every 2 years following that. So it would essentially be recalibrated every time the formula is run to meet all FORA's CIP obligations.
If I could just add, it's also if there is a significant event that occurs, intervening event, there's also a recalculation. Some of what you see this month is a bit of making sure that we look very carefully at exactly what the formula is, what factors are supposed to be used in doing the calculation. What you have in front of you is EPS's best and conservative look at what it means to follow the current approved CIP, which is the basis for the build-out calculations that are being done that you receive. That CIP from last year, we all recognize may have some projections for build-out that are inconsistent with past year's experience. We know that already. We've reported that to you in the past, but that's still the number in the resolution and the implementation agreement amendments that we are to use in formulating the basis of calculating the fee. So in many ways, that's the formula we use. So that's the first step. Now, Jonathan mentioned next spring we'll have another look at what that looks like. We'll have an experience of a whole year. We'll understand if, in fact, we wind up with an extraordinary development that occurs, that many permits are pulled, all of the assumptions from the CIP last year all of a sudden materialize. I got a bet on that one for you. But that's possible, but it is unlikely. And so I know this board will be looking this spring at what those calculations look like, and that's still a couple of months away. So what's adopted in a couple of months this year will be the calculation that will need to be used next spring.
Right, and my point is that the consultants initially recommended, they've written it now a different way, but the consultant originally recommended that we use the current market study rate of absorption, and that recommendation and the report that they would have written using that never came to this board, and a group that is not made up of policymakers essentially instructed the consultant to go against their recommendation, and we never had a chance to discuss whether that's what we wanted to have happen or not. That's my point, and we can get into probably more of the details of the formula and how that plays out once we've had a chance to actually read this, think about it, understand it a little bit. My point is that there was basically a policy level decision made in an administrative committee, and I don't think that's proper. I think that kind of discussion should have happened at this board. So that's my point. Thank you.
Jason, you had your hand up.
Sorry, I'm just getting my head around this. If we're taking this and we'll be able to ask questions of staff between now and the next meeting, I think that's probably the better way to handle the question.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions by board members? Tom? Oh, I'm sorry.
I think Mayor Camp was first.
I saw your hand first, but Bill, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I have to agree that this is a very important FORA policy issue. I do have concerns, at least from this report, that absorption rates don't appear in these models of forecasted revenues and models of forecasted costs. Since Marina Coast Water District in particular has been a little bit bitten in the rear end by slow absorption rates and fast expenditure rates of putting things in the ground, I would strongly urge the board to take a very careful look at what EPS has to say about this so that we get the most accurate both forecasting of future revenues coming in from these various sources and that we match up the CIP very carefully with those revenues going forward. Thank you.
Bill?
I think my concern was along the same lines. What is the absorption rate? Is that what is the unit in that? Is that a percent? How do I calculate? What are the things that go into it? I'm sorry, I'm really at a basic level here.
So the absorption rate is just what's being forecasted on forward between 2013 and 2020, and so under the approved FORA board's approved CIP, the assumption is that there will be approximately 6,160 new residential housing units by 2020. There will be 1,813 existing residential housing units by 2020. And
How many?
1,813 existing or replacement residential housing units by 2020. In the order of 1 million plus for each of the retail, office, and industrial building square footage by 2020. So it's pretty significant build-out assumption.
So, and I guess I ought to disclose, we've had something of a discussion on this in the Finance Committee. And what I think I'm hearing is that we've taken the full long-term base reuse plan and said it's all going to happen in the next 7 years, and the assessment said it's going to take 40. Does any of that disparity influence how we compute this rate?
From the analysis of the consultant, as was pointed out on the absorption caveat, that if you assumed
and I'm sorry, by the way, that was really fine print. There was a whole bunch of stuff up there, and it didn't stand out particularly clearly.
So they pointed out that the difference in fee reduction under the current CIP, it's a 35% proposed reduction. Under the market study, it would be 10% or less fee reduction.
I'm still, frankly, I'm back at absorption rate. What is absorption rate?
So the absorption
it's
rate...
something per something is usually the definition of a rate.
So you're looking at the FORA CIP absorption rate of 700 to 800 housing units per year being produced, and the market study rate of housing units is closer to 180 units per year being produced.
Is that translated into dollars or percent or anything at some point in this formula?
Yes, it's under the market study from the reassessment report. If you calculated the formula using that absorption schedule, you'll get to about a 10% or less reduction in fees. If you use the FORA CIP, you get to a 35% reduction in fees.
And I'm going to apologize. I may have missed something in here, but is the formula actually in here anywhere?
No, the formula is described in the implementation agreements in the resolution passed by the board last August.
So, okay, so, and my apologies, but I'm feeling some struggle, as I think maybe other folks are too, to feel that I have information in front of me that helps me make an informed decision on what we're doing.
Bill, I think your questions and the other questions, I don't think we're going to actually approve any resolution today. So I think the staff is getting these questions that you're asking, and that information will be provided before our next get-together, and we'll have a lot more information in the background.
I would hope so. But thank you for your patience through that.
Okay. Any other questions by members of the board? Yes, Jason.
Well, I was going to, this is one of my questions offline, but I think that it's helpful to me to see and maybe it would be helpful to others, to see the sensitivity to key variables. And I appreciate that I think the final page includes one such sensitivity, but it seems like there's a number of other key variables, such as the one that Mayor Camp was just noting, and it would be helpful to see the impact of
10%
this
versus
number.
35%.
Right, or the rate of, I'm sorry, I forget now what the term was that was, but the rate at which housing is developed, that's going to be a judgment call. We can inform it based on the market studies, but that seems to be a critical variable. So more formal sensitivity analysis in terms of what the impact of that variable has in the final fee calculation would be helpful to me.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions by members of the board? Seeing none, out to the public. Any questions by members of the public? Ma'am.
Hello. Thank you, Chair Edelman, board members. My name is Chrisanne Giles. I'm the Executive Director of the Building Industry Association. I appreciate the opportunity to comment on the Capital Improvement Program Phase 2 study. I've sent out a comment letter from the BIA. We didn't receive the details until just last evening, so I'm sorry you couldn't get it beforehand, but I wanted to be able to get these comments into the record. The BIA appreciates the work that was done by staff, the FORA Administration Committee, and EPS to apply the formulaic approach the way it was drafted by this board for the first time, calculating the CFD special tax rate and funding 100% of the CIP programs in mitigation. What staff outlined is it became clear in applying the formulaic approach that the adopted sunset date of 2020 is problematic to effectively build out the CIP. Slowing the expected construction absorption, how many units you're going to build in any given year, beyond 2020 creates an unexpected problem. While the adopted CIP may have an aggressive absorption, and that's under discussion, as it has for the last 15 years, this board has adopted it, FORA has no legal way to collect CFD fees beyond 2020. The only way to fund a CIP program with an extended construction timeline is to assume that some form of FORA will continue beyond 2020 to calculate the CFD fees, to collect the tax increments, and collect land sale revenue. Otherwise, the formulaic modeling becomes too complicated to try and determine what that CFD fee would become in an AB 1600 nexus-based development fee post-FORA. So we would concede from the BIA that it is likely that this board is going to make sure that some form of FORA exists beyond 2020 in order to collect that CFD fee and in order to build your CFD program, or CIP program, pardon me, to collect tax increments and to collect land sale revenues. So as we all forecast in the future of what build-out looks like beyond 2020, whether it's 2030, whether it's 2040, whether it's 2060, any calculation that includes the CFD fees would also include tax increment and land sale revenue to follow the intent of the formulaic approach that you adopted. Now, we've run the numbers 20 ways to Sunday. The fee is lowered even more if you extend the timeline because you can collect more tax increment. The problem with the first analysis, which was pointed out by Jane, was that there wasn't a consistent application of the CFD collection and the revenue sources, which was the whole intent of adopting the formula in the first place. The difference between looking at the long-range plan and the short-range plan is a couple $1,000, and we'll be looking at that in detail next spring. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other members of the public? Please, sir.
Good afternoon, Chair Edelin and directors. I am Andy Leaf from South County Housing, a nonprofit developer. As most of you know, we're building the 108-unit University Village apartments, which do serve 100% very low-income residents. And I'm here at the risk of looking like I didn't listen to the discussion that just happened. I'm just going to plow forward with my comments. The current FORA fee threatens to torpedo our project, which has now started site work. We moved forward in February of this year to protect $12 million in subsidy. That was, going to go away if we didn't get going. We were between a rock and a hard place because, we had to protect the subsidy, but we were really having budget problems with the project. One of the reasons we moved forward was based on the implementation agreement that FORA and the City of Marina signed in September of 2012. So 7 months later, we are on that proverbial limb, way out there waiting for a new fee, and a fee that accurately takes care of the FORA CIP. So I am strongly encouraging the board to take action today or soon, today preferably, to implement the formulaic fee before you. I thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, sir. Any other members of the public wishing to address the issue?
Hi, my name is Sid Williams. I'd just like to remind you that this action has been kicking around for a very, very long time now. Your responsibility is EE and E, and one of them is economic redevelopment, and that is not going to go forward very fast until you make a decision on this. Obviously, you need to do your due diligence to make sure that it's an intelligent decision. But I encourage you to accept this report tonight, give the staff some guidance to bring you back the information you need, and get this thing approved. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker.
Good evening, board. My name is Debbie Platt. I'm a staff member at the City of Marina, and I sometimes serve on the administrative committee. I wanted to ask for clarification from staff. My understanding on the absorption rate was that the consultants had a market study And for a sample, they put the market study in last year to see where the calculation would come out. We were going along using that market study and looked back at the formula to understand what the formula said, and the formula said that we were to use the current CIP. And so the current CIP means the jurisdictions put their absorption estimates in during the CIP process annually each year, and we had done that last spring. And as Jonathan was saying, we'll put them in again this spring, and then it will affect the CIP calculation in the future. But my understanding was there wasn't a policy decision made at the administrative committee, but we looked back at what was written in the formula, and we are following what the formula says with this calculation. But correct me if I'm wrong, staff members. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other members of the public wishing to address the issue? Okay, seeing none, bring it back to the board. I'd need a motion at least to accept the report, or any other motion you'd like to put forward. Do anyone wish to make a motion? Yes,
Could I
Jason.
Just ask a quick. It
Sure.
seems like the Building Industry Association raises a really complicated problem that I'm having trouble thinking through, and Michael's maybe looking at me like there's not an easy way to square this one. I'm sorry. I was saying the Building Industry Association raises an interesting challenge that I would like to understand what the staff's initial reaction is to that. I would also hope that when this comes back to the board, that there could be a more complete answer to the problem posed by BIA.
The answer to the question is a very complex one, as is the question. And depending on the assumptions you use when you plug them into the model, as you know, with almost all models, you have a different outcome. And your request for sensitivity analyses that show what happens based on different assumptions can provide you with that. What Debbie Platt was talking about and what the BIA are talking about is you have to use comparable assumptions in order to make the analysis. So if you use the CIP for a certain amount of build-out, you have to use it for all categories. If you were to try to pick and choose, you then start to breach the principle you apply in making the analysis. So if you assume something goes away one year, but the others don't, what's the basis for doing that? If all of these are the revenue sources you use to supply for FORA, shouldn't they all be calculated based on the same timing? That's essentially the point. So we can bring that back to you and show you what sensitivity analysis would be if you took one out or moved one out. But this is a conversation that isn't brand new. This is part of the difficult conversation we started to have at the administrative committee about if you use any other analysis other than the one that's in the approved CIP for all of the funding categories. You start to build quite a detailed, elaborate, sophisticated, complex discussion.
Sorry, but through the chair, can I? If we use an assumption of build-out that's in the market study that's a couple decades, certainly beyond FORA's termination, do we have to fully fund the CIP and the other obligations by the time FORA sunsets? Or what happens at that sunset? Do we then pass off some of that remaining as of yet unfunded obligation to the underlying land use jurisdictions at that point? Is that what happens?
Yes.
I'm going to claim, I'm still in my first year, so I apologize that I'm only now.
I think I have a 3-sentence answer for you.
Seeing the problem that we're up to.
The first is the LAFCO process will dictate a number of these decisions. We are required under the legislation that extended FORA to provide a report first to the FORA board and then to the legislature on how all of those answers get undertaken, and that's in 2018. All of the extensive ones. But your primary question is, well, I forgot the first part because
Well, my primary question is if we use an assumption that it's going to take 30 years for build out and we're going to calibrate the model accordingly, and so we're going to raise, and assuming that is true, we're only going to see, 7 years of that build out, so we're only going to fund, 1/4 of the CIP and the other obligations. Where does that leave us at the end of 2020?
Well, that's why I pointed out the LAFCO process, because the other policies that this board has adopted are things like you pay as you go. So you don't have a CEQA mitigation until you have the development that has the impact on the environment, for example. So that's the pay as you go process. There are other assumptions that are way beyond the life of FORA that have to do with the Habitat Conservation Plan. And the answers to those questions include what LAFCO might to do to define what FORA's obligations are after FORA's sunset, and what happens with FORA's resources to pay for those obligations. So there likely will be jurisdictional requirements to adopt a community facilities district or some other form of collecting the same fee to meet the mitigations. FORA's land sales revenue might go to underlying jurisdictions that have the land, but if there's no land sales revenue, for example, in the county because there's no development, but the county has lots of obligations, then that's a general fund hit for the county. So there might be some revenue sharing decision that has to do with that. Because right now, FORA as a whole takes care of all of the former Fort Ord. It isn't taken care of in bits and pieces.
Okay, that's quite helpful. So if I can paraphrase, part of the answer is that if we only see 1/4 of the full build out, we're only going to have to fund 1/4 of the CEQA obligations and other obligations, and that's one way of addressing this. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, Bill, start with you this time.
I would certainly move to receive the report, but I'd like to pursue a couple questions as well.
Go ahead.
And it has to do with the comments by the Building Industry Association. I thought they were good ones. That how do we compute into our approach on this the past FORA aspects of what will happen on the former Fort Ord, and so I hope we get some recommendation. The more immediate thing that struck me was the City of Marina's comment that we do add up the jurisdiction forecast year by year into a FORA CIP. So is the build-out rate dependent on what the jurisdictions provide per se, or is it the adopted CIP estimates that are in the FORA board-approved numbers, which we'll see for the next year in a meeting or so? Which of those do we go on?
Adopted CIP.
It's the adopted CIP. And so the significance of that, and I think I ought to just put it out on the table, is that when we add up the jurisdictions, it's a really high number, and the track record year after year after year is we don't quite get there. And so the adopted CIP is some adjustment to that to try to get closer to the ballpark of what we actually do and the realistic absorption during the coming year. And it's always a guess. Forecasts are always wrong, and we ought to know that. It's just kind of how it happens. But so I'm also interested in the mechanism kind of post-FORA so that we don't have to solve all of the world's problems in the next 7 years, because I think this time horizon goes beyond that. So that's kind of my commentary on it, but I'll make the motion that we at least receive the report, which
Tom,
gives us a foundation.
You were next.
Yeah, thank you. Just a comment. It's unfortunate that the original legislation that created FORA had very little to say about termination. Right. All it had to say was, when you get to termination, take all your problems and throw them over the fence to LAFCO. I think it was an excellent move on the part of Assemblyman Monning to put in the requirement that by 2018 we come up with some sort of termination plan to recommend to FORA. I would simply point out to the board that maybe as soon as the dust is settled on this reassessment issue, that you might want to develop that termination plan well in advance of 2018, because that may answer some of the questions such as were raised by the BIA today.
Thank you. Okay, we have a motion on the floor by Mayor Camp. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Councilwoman Gail Morton. Any discussion on the motion? Yes, Jane?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, as Jonathan walked us through that report, and we saw there was going to be a 35.6 or whatever it is percent reduction in the fee. I didn't quite believe it at first, but if you look at the March 15th staff report thing that I handed out, EPS, when they did the formula calculation, using their assumptions of the market absorption, they came up with a 3.7% fee reduction. So that's a big difference. I just wanted to point that out.
How do we say close enough for government work? Yes, Frank.
As a member of the Marina City Council, I must say that this is one of the most frustrating things that I've experienced. I think Mr. Williams hit it on the head when he said this has been around forever, and it just seems to be sitting there with all kinds of complications being created one meeting after another. The City of Marina has signed the implementation amendment to the implementation agreement back in, I think, August. It's been recorded, and our developers, South County Housing, Cinemark Theater, we're sitting there. We're waiting for certainty. In January, we changed the wording back to what it was back in August. So once again, we're here today. I had intended to possibly look and make a motion to accept the resolution, but I can tell from the board members that there's a tremendous lack of information that they want before they make a decision. It's very frustrating. It shouldn't be this way. I cannot justify in my mind why it's taken so long. And I just hope the developers out there are able to stick with it to make sure that we finally get to the point where we can say to them, here are the definite numbers, let's move on. Because there's no reason at this stage that Mr. Camp or Mr. Moore or Supervisor Parker should have these questions to put forth. They should have been answered a long time ago. It's very disappointing. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Any other discussion on the motion? Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, next we have new business, Veteran Cemetery Agreement and Budget. 3 subcategories: consider approval of Seaside FORA Cemetery Agreement. 2, consider approval of 4,000 fiscal year 2012-13 budget increase for Veteran Cemetery Consultants. And 3, consider authorizing a $30,000 check to California Department of General Services for land acquisition services. Jonathan, I believe this is yours.
Members of the board, previous to this meeting, City of Seaside has adopted a cemetery agreement that would require FORA to execute as well for it to go into effect. So that is attachment A in the staff report. FORA has been informed by the Department of General Services, who is handling the real estate acquisition for the state, that they would require a $30,000 check for them to perform their services on accepting the property for the veteran cemetery. And so recommendation number 2 would increase FORA's budget from $56,000 to $60,000 for veteran cemetery consultants, which would provide the budget needed for FORA to write the check to Department of General Services, which is the 3rd recommendation, to consider authorizing the executive officer to issue that check of $30,000 to State Department of General Services. And just a note that attachment B includes the Monterey County Board of Supervisors resolution, which provided direction to FORA to transfer the land to the state. And then attachment C is a memo from Authority Council addressing CEQA issues on the transfer. And then on your tables today, there were some slight adjustments in the agreement, the Seaside agreement, which Authority Council may be able to address if board members have questions on those changes.
Yes, Chair Edelin, with respect to those 2 changes that Jonathan just mentioned, I think most of you have seen these because there's a 1-page at your table, and it simply notes that there are a couple of corrections that are editorial, primarily, that have to do with making sure that under section 1.6 there's clarity about the responsibility for moving ahead with the veteran cemetery. This is a state cemetery, and the way this was originally crafted, it indicated parties, and parties is defined as FORA. FORA and the city of Seaside are not performing the veteran cemetery. That's a state project. There was also, and this was pointed out by Authority Council, there were also a couple of board questions about what happens if the cemetery parcel does not move ahead as a burial site, and if the state returns those parcels locally. The implementation agreement of the Fort Ord Reuse Authority has with both the City of Seaside and the County of Monterey would specify that whenever the county or the city were to sell property, that 50% of the land sales revenues comes back to FORA. And on this particular issue, that's already governed by the implementation agreement, but to make that clear, under Section 1.7, Authority Council, in response to the questions by board members, is suggesting we add just one sentence that says, if the state reconveys the parcel to the city under Section 1.6, this is under the city's agreement, FORA will be entitled to half the land sale proceeds as provided in the implementation agreement. Those are primarily editorial in nature. It probably would not require a further action by the jurisdiction, so it should not slow down the process that's been outlined so aptly by Senator Monning's office for getting to conclusion by August 15th.
Any question by board members? Yes, Jane?
Just a quick thing on the county's resolution. The resolution copy that's in our packet is not the final one, so before you send it, we actually made some wording changes at the board meeting to allow more clarity and more time for money to be raised to meet the obligation. So you'll want to be sure to get the signed one. So
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other, yes?
I just had a couple of questions. So what this is saying that that FORA is electing not to take its percentage. I just wanted to know I just want to read the authority in our base reuse plan. If this is a discretionary act, I'm just trying to have you tell me where this came from. The authority to forego the collection of the fee.
The land sale revenue?
Yep.
Well, the authority is, the description is all in the implementation agreement that has been entered into between Seaside and FORA in 2001. And it provides that FORA will receive half the land sale revenue when the jurisdiction sells the property. There's going to be no sale of the property. There will be no land sale revenue. So there will be no 50% share. FORA is not foregoing anything.
Okay. So it's not a discretionary act. It's just the transfer is at
it's
zero.
Not discretionary. When the implementation agreement says that the jurisdiction, in this case Seaside, may either accept title or designate someone else to take title, and and they have the right, as does Marina and every other jurisdiction, they have the right to say, don't give it to us, give it to usually a developer. But in this case, a state, and we have no choice. FORA has no choice but to honor that request. It's a ministerial act.
Okay. And then I just had a second quick question about the changes that are proposed being characterized as ministerial when this is already signed by the city of Seaside.
Well, they're not no, I don't think it's been characterized as ministerial changes. They are changes. They're not substantive changes. They are changes to clarify the intent of the parties. And yes, it has been executed by the city of Seaside. My understanding from talking to the city attorney is that when the city attorney or when the city council authorized the execution of this, the city council at the same time authorized any small minor changes that the city attorney might think were advisable. You can turn to your right and get a more authoritative.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Nope.
Any other questions by board members? Seeing none, out to the public. Any questions by members of the public? Seeing none, back to the board. I'd entertain a motion, please. Okay, we have the motion to... Okay, I'm sorry. Yep, come on forward, please.
My name is Mike Salerno from Marina, representing Keep Fort Ord Wild as well. The first thing, I wanted to present a letter on behalf of my colleague Mike Weaver, who had to leave. So I'd like to present this for the record. It's a letter his group submitted. I'm really surprised not to see it in the packet or on the table out there. There was a extensive article about his the FOCAG's concerns about the property, so I'm submitting it for the record on his behalf. One of the questions I had has been partially addressed by this addendum, and that was a concern that FORA would not, in essence, regain its 1/2 share if something happened where the cemetery didn't go forward. It looks like that has been at least partially addressed. Now, I would assume this agreement would have to go back to Seaside, since Seaside is essentially approved a different version of the agreement, so that'd be a question for the board. A second concern I had, and it relates to the addendum as well, it references the implementation agreement. And fundamentally, this is a real estate transaction, but there's no value placed on it. So how does FORA know what it's giving up? Is the property worth $20 million, $10 million? Half of that is a lot of money. It's potentially worth millions of dollars. And then looking through the implementation agreement, a third concern I had is that there seems to be a distinct script that should be followed in terms of at least putting some kind of appraisal and valuation on the property, and that doesn't seem to have happened. So those are my concerns. Thank you.
Any other public comments? Yep, any other public comments, please move forward. We try and keep the proceedings moving forward.
Good afternoon, evening at this point, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm Richard Garza from the Central Coast Veteran Cemetery Foundation. As was pointed out in the presentation, we're dealing with a timeline. If action does not get taken, the cemetery doesn't happen. It's basically that simple. Or there's a significant chance the cemetery doesn't happen. I'm never going to say never. So in that respect, I urge this board to take action as quickly as possible to approve the transfer of the land and whatever needs to take place to have that happen to the state. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Any other public comment? Okay, thank you very much. We have a motion on the floor. Oh, I'm sorry.
Am I insignificant?
My eyes are going. Sorry, ma'am, go ahead.
I'm Janet Parks. I'm from the foundation, and Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Hooray, a light at the end of the tunnel. The state cannot ask for a grant from the federal government to build a cemetery unless it has the title or a deed to the property. With this transfer, they will be able to get the money from the federal government. And do you know how hard it is to raise money for the cemetery when you have nothing but words? There's nothing. No one's, they said, where's the land? Who owns it? Where is it? So please, I urge you to approve this amendment that you're working on. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. Eric Peterson on this issue representing Monterey County Green Party. Monterey County Green Party continues to support a veteran cemetery. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Any other? Okay.
Hi, good evening. My name is Michelle Soros, and I live and I vote in Marina.
And I would like to urge my particular council members to approve the transfer of this parcel to the state. The veterans deserve it. They have lived here and worked here for most of their retired lives. Some of them didn't just end up here at their last stop. This might have been their middle stop, and they chose Monterey County to come back to. We need to honor them and let them have their cemetery. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker.
Hello, everybody, council members and board members. I'm Elizabeth Billingsley, a 52-year resident of the city of Marina. My husband took basic training at Fort Ord, 1949. He was stationed here quite often, back and forth when we were moved around in the Army. I would like to see the cemetery. Our veterans deserve it. They fought for that piece of land. Maybe not here at home, but overseas. My husband is a Vietnam veteran. And you ask these people, the ones who are in the military in Korea and World War II, we have World War II veterans, they would love to be buried out here. I don't see why anybody would stand in the way to having a veteran cemetery on a Fort Ord, which is the perfect place to have one. Thank you, and I hope you approve this. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker.
My name's Art Capsalis. I'm a 30-year homeowner in Seaside, 36-year member of the American Legion in Marina. I'm not here to ask you for the cemetery. I think the question is this board going to approve it? Do you want it? And that's not the question. The question is the people you represent want it. I looked it up. There's 33,000 veterans in this area. The veterans are going to die. Do they want the cemetery? I'm not sure. When I die, I want to stay here. And the reason I want to stay here is I've got 18 people in my family. 3 of them are homeowners. I've got 10 grandchildren. The plan is stay here. I want to stay with my kids. They want to visit me. I don't want them to have to drive to 100 miles away. How do we get it done? You vote for the cemetery. I don't care about how much it costs. I don't care about the percentages and all this stuff. The question is, does this area deserve a veteran cemetery? With all these veterans and their families, they're all voters, I think we have to have a cemetery. Please do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker.
Good evening, board members. I'm Nancy Amadeo from the city of Marina. I'm also a veteran spouse. We did a lot to get a national monument here, and there's been this cry that this will bring economic opportunity to the region, and that it would accurately represent the veterans community and the historical significance of this piece of property. Far more, the Veterans Cemetery will do that. Far more, the Veterans Cemetery will bring economic development to the region. It will bring visitors to the region. It will fill our hotels. If you go to other areas that have veteran cemeteries, they bring large numbers of people, people who want to honor the service of those who have cared for with their lives our nation. I'm asking you to think of those people today, those that will come and visit, those who have served, and support the Veteran Cemetery. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any other speakers? Okay, seeing none, we have a motion on the floor by Mayor Joe Gunter.
Clarifying question, is the motion for all 3 proposed recommended actions?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. Okay. And the actions are, just so everybody knows where we're coming from, authorizing the executive officer to execute the Seaside Fort Ord Reuse Authority Cemetery Agreement as amended. Approval of the fiscal year 12-13 FORA budget increase for the Veteran Cemetery Consultants from $56,000 to $60,000, and authorizing the executive officer to issue a check in the amount of $30,000 to the California Department of General Services for land acquisition services necessary for the state to acquire the approximately 84.4 acre cemetery area. Do we have a second to the motion? Yes, so we have from Councilman Alexander. So we have a motion second. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Okay.
Chair, if I might.
Yes, please. Go ahead.
I just wanted to put out an appeal that we're in the middle or just starting the budget discussions in each of our respective jurisdictions. I'd encourage you, and I will be doing this for Carmel, to include whatever you can, and I realize budgets are tight. I think that each of our cities should be willing to put something towards the $800,000 that's needed. I think that other jurisdictions that will benefit should also be encouraged, that may not be represented in this room, should also be encouraged. And I don't know whether we would need some action or whether, how to accomplish that. And I think that FORA itself should consider whether there's anything in our budget that we'll be approving later on this year that could be allocated. Finally, I'd ask that each of us personally, in our capacities, of course, vary, but consider what you can, and I would encourage you to speak with your friends and colleagues. Finally, I think that there is a real opportunity, having spoken with several land conservation groups, for a land conservation effort to raise funds in the time frame necessary that can go towards the $800,000 that is needed to be in place by middle of August 15th. So that's my general appeal, and I would encourage that we agendize opportunities as they come up for any sort of land conservation that may help us generate the funds necessary. Thank you.
Jason, thank you. Okay, next on the agenda is public comment period. Members of the public have 3 minutes to address the board on any item not on the agenda. If you wish to address the board, please come forward, state your name for the record, and if you are going to address, please move forward so we're not waiting long periods of time where people are walking across the room. We try to minimize the amount of waiting time here. First speaker, please.
Margaret Davis from Friends of the Fort Ord Warhorse. I want to invite everyone, if this is working. Is it? The overhead. The third annual Fort Ord Warhorse Day. We're working hard to preserve Fort Ord history and get people out there understanding it and enjoying it. The event is May 18th from 10 to 2. We'll have living historians in World War II uniform. There'll be a horse-drawn field artillery and cannon, command post, a World War II Jeep, Army blacksmith forge, superb flash museum that you've got to catch it when it's there, of the U.S. Army's horse soldiers at Fort Ord. This year we're having some special salutes to the National Monument. There will be some original music composed for the monument and played by DLI Brass Band, Marina Youth Arts, and kids coloring. As usual, we'll have our Color Guard National Anthem. There'll be then and now pictures of Fort Ord. We are having a bicycle ride for families to be able to be at the event and then take off to Stillwell Hall Overlook down at the beach, come up through the National Monument, go to Comanche's Grave, last ceremonial warhorse of Fort Ord, and circle back around. That's an 11-mile ride led by Babe Bikes of Carmel, free to the public. If you need to rent a bike, call them up, 655-BIKE. There's also a kids' little mini bike ride going from the Marine Equestrian Center to the roller hockey, a total of a mile. So parents can just walk along or ride along. First experience out there riding Fort Ord. So I hope everybody will come and see your history, celebrate your veterans in a very real and significant way, and enjoy what Fort Ord has to offer. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other member of the public? Okay.
Good afternoon again. My name is Eric Peterson, And in kind of reverse full disclosure, I would like to point out that I am not a member of the Port Ord Access Alliance, nor do I represent the Port Ord Access Alliance. At the beginning of the meeting, Mr. Ederlin recognized Bill Nye for what was essentially his own public comments period. And Mr. Nye exercised his privilege. No other speakers were allowed to speak. There was no rebuttal, and there was no corrections to the misinformation he provided. The initiative on the open space is very different from what Mr. Nye represented. It does not prohibit all development, as he said. It does not prohibit the Veterans Cemetery, nor does it substantially impact the cemetery in any way. It does not prohibit the Veterans Clinic. I don't know if there's a way to fact check speakers, especially when they're given a special privilege, but it would be really good if that could have happened. Just as an example, as I mentioned earlier, Monterey County Green Party supports the Veterans Cemetery, and I was part of that decision. And we strongly support it, and we also strongly support the Access Initiative. If any of you have ever heard me on KRXA radio, I've also supported the Veterans Cemetery then. In the future, Mr. Ederlin, I think it would be a good idea if you're going to give somebody a special privilege to speak like that, to also allow rebuttal for misinformation or for other speakers. Maybe put all public speakers at the same time. I'm not an expert on the Brown Act, but I am pretty good at research. And you have criticized lawsuits in the past, including today, and this is kind of an example of providing another opportunity for a lawsuit. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Any other members of the public wishing to address the board? Public comment? Going once, going twice. Okay, public comment period is closed. Next on the item on the agenda, the Executive Officer's report.
Yes, under the Executive Officer's report, almost every item there is self-explanatory. There are a couple of items I do want to comment on. The Veterans Issues Advisory Committee is now actively engaged in meeting on a regular basis, and there's a slight adjustment that the members of the Executive Committee made earlier in the charge because we noted a typographical error in the name of the clinic. So we've corrected that in case anyone had questions about it. I also wanted to note under travel report, we have a couple of items there that have pointed out that we are going to be traveling back and forth to Sacramento, and also noting Robert Norris's travel back to D.C. and the reports that he received from the Veterans Administration while he was there at his own expense. I have no further comments, Chair, from anything on the Executive Officer's report, unless there's a question from a member of the board.
Any questions from board members about the Executive Officer's report? Seeing none. Okay, any items from members? Any items you want to share? Seeing none, ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned. Thank you very much for coming.